When athletes want to improve their athletic ability, they often turn to professionals to arrange their exercise plans, and some athletes with enough financial support will use advanced monitoring equipment to provide help, while seeking professional assistance, such as OptiTrack, Vicon. The more elaborate the equipment, the more expensive it is. For those who can afford these advanced devices, they aid practitioners in better evaluating their clients' joint motor abilities. In traditional diagnostic models, medical practitioners have limited contact with their clients, as effective communication between the two sides often only exists in face-to-face appointments. But the rapid development of internet technology in recent years has created more possibilities. In this project, we focus on the following issues: how to help physiotherapists better monitor the hip joint movement data of their athlete clients, how to help physiotherapists establish more flexible and effective contact patterns with their athlete clients, how to reduce the cost of using advanced monitoring equipment for athletes. Our project is called SURPASS. The project concept is to help physiotherapists track their patients' hip movement progress through an application, as well as build an online community between physiotherapists and their patients. In this program, the physiotherapist will evaluate the patient's hip movement through a squat test. The main function of the application is a diagnostic tool to help the physiotherapist determine if a hip shift occurs during the patient's movement, which can be an indication of mobility imbalances, strength deficiencies, and motor control issues within the patient. Patients will wear rented IMU sensors on their body and take a squat exercise test, which will be monitored by a physical therapist via audio-visual means consisting of an application interface and audio feedback. The physical therapist will use the movement data acquired to determine if a hip shift has occurred. If so, what hip is weaker and how severe is it? Our core function is a real-time hip movement monitoring. As an athlete does a squat, their hip data is recorded and stored. For each squat, the difference between the right and left hip is calculated to determine if a hip shift has occurred. Therapists can get audio and visual feedback from the mobile app SURPASS. If a hip shift does occur, the physiotherapist is alerted at what point in time the hip shift occurred, as well as the sonification of the movement data moves from harmonic to inharmonic, producing an unstable sound. The more unstable the sound, the greater the severity of the hip shift. At the same time, the real-time monitoring interface notifies the physiotherapist of his client's hip displacement during the test. Using yellow squares representing the movement of the left and right hips, the two vertical lines represent the baseline of the hip bone in vertical motion, and will be green when the hip is moving at the right angle, and the red when the hip is moving at the right angle. As the hip bone descends to the white dotted line, the system calculates the hip joint displacement angle. The green fixed square represents the baseline of the hip movement at the correct angle. Other data included the angle of hip bone movement, number of squats, and the time spent in the squat. The hip movement data is processed and sonified through a software called MaxMSP. From the data, we calculate the difference between the right hip and left hip angle values. The greater the difference between the hip angle values, the more severe the hip shift. In addition, to calculate the difference between the hips, we also derive the acceleration and the velocity of each hip. This allows us not only to determine if a hip shift occurs, but also which hip is weaker. SURPASS first level has three interfaces: Home, Real-Time Detection, and Me. The homepage has two auxiliary interfaces, one for recording and one for consulting. On the recorded screen, the physiotherapist can view any client's biometric information, progress of the training program, and historic data on the hip tests. The reliable interface of the historic data is a more detailed movement data record, so that the physical therapist can more intuitively see the specific data of the client's hip test on a particular day. In addition, the therapist can also switch the client's personal information on the consulting interface, modify the client's training plan, and the next appointment time. In conclusion, we hope that this application can effectively assist the physiotherapist in diagnosing the hip condition of the athletes and allow the physiotherapist to maintain a closer and more comfortable connection with their client.